The alien queen welcomed me to her planet, but her reason left me stunned. I lost my way and the alien queen invited me to her planet, and I was shocked to find out why. The void was indifferent. Commander Elias Vance had always liked to think of space as a kind of cosmic road trip, equal parts danger and awe with a playlist of existential dread and the occasional glitchy jazz transmission from Earth's last analog satellite. But right now, as he floated in the debris of his once proud vessel Ironsworn with half a hull, no guidance system, and a slightly passive-aggressive AI that kept offering him motivational quotes about new beginnings, Elias decided space was being a real jerk. "This is fine," he muttered, adjusting the cracked HUD on his helmet, which had begun displaying emojis in place of telemetry data. A sad face blinked over the oxygen meter. "Yeah, very professional." His last memories of stability involved a perfectly executed hyperspace jump gone rogue. An anomaly in the Perseus Rift had flared like an angry sun, pulling Ironsworn into a gravity snare that shouldn't have existed. It scrambled his systems, fried the comms, and spat him out into a part of the galaxy so off-grid even the cartographers said meh. He checked his vitals, bruised ribs, mild concussion, ego in critical condition. "Commander," came the AI's voice, painfully cheerful, "we are now orbiting a previously uncharted planet. Biosignatures detected, atmosphere appears breathable, mood cautiously optimistic. I swear if you get any more cheerful, I'm going to eject your core and use it as a paperweight." Noted, also the escape pod was deployed approximately 4.3 seconds before impact. "You are, for lack of a better phrase, a very lucky idiot." Gravity took hold. The last thing Elias saw before his pod began its screaming descent was the pale blue surface of the planet, swirling clouds tinged with green, a massive aurora flickering across the stratosphere like a living thing. Then the pod hit the atmosphere and everything turned into a flaming roller coaster fueled by his regrets and the unmistakable smell of burning snacks from the emergency ration compartment. When he came to, it was with a face full of violet grass. For a moment Elias simply lay there, limbs sprawled, his mouth full of plant that tasted like sour mint and betrayal. The air was warm and oddly floral, and the sky above him shifted between shades of turquoise and wine red, as though the planet couldn't decide what aesthetic to commit to. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. His body protested in a chorus of groans, cracks, and one dramatic gasp that may have come from his knee. "Well, this is just fantastic," he said to no one in particular. "Stranded, injured, and pretty sure the local wildlife is judging me." A rustle in the grass caught his attention. He reached instinctively for his pulse pistol, gone, of course, probably still fused to the wreckage. Instead, he armed himself with a jagged piece of escape pod metal and a winning smile. Then he saw her. She moved like wind incarnate, silent and fluid, her long cloak flowing behind her as though trailing the memory of forgotten storms. Tall and statuesque, she looked almost human. Almost. Her ears were long, elegant curves that rose past her head like a crown, catching the sunlight. Her skin was faintly luminous, not glowing per se, but as if it reflected a secret light the rest of the universe couldn't see. Her eyes, large, silver, and full of stars, narrowed in curiosity as she approached. Elias blinked. Hi." She tilted her head, then smiled, and it was like watching the night sky laugh. "You have arrived," she said in a voice that seemed to echo with harmonics his translator struggled to process. "Yeah, a bit of a rough landing. I was hoping for something more upright." "You are intact," she said, as if that was all that mattered. Then, gently, "I am Chirel, Queen of Zephyra." Elias blinked again. "You're a queen." "Indeed." "Well, Your Majesty, this may be a weird first impression, but I might have drooled on your plants. Sorry about that." She studied him a moment longer, then offered her hand, slender, graceful, shimmering faintly with traces of bioluminescence. When she touched him, a jolt of warmth surged through his skin, not unpleasant but deeply unsettling, like his atoms were being reintroduced to each other. "You were expected," she said simply. Elias squinted. "I was. There is a place prepared for you, come now." Now, Elias wasn't usually one to follow strange women with cosmic eyes and vaguely threatening grace into alien forests, but she smelled like starlight and citrus, and honestly his options were limited. As he stumbled after her through a canopy of luminous trees and gravity that felt like it was holding its breath, he tried not to think about how surreal this all was, or the fact that her guards, who shimmered in and out of cloaked form like polite ghosts, were watching him with a mixture of reverence and suspicion, or that Cherelle occasionally looked back at him with an expression like she was ticking boxes on an invisible checklist. "This isn't a dream, is it?" he asked, more to himself. "No," she replied without turning, "though your brain is currently experiencing mild trauma-induced hallucinations. One of them is about a talking sandwich. That explains why the bread insulted my leadership style." She finally glanced over her shoulder, that hint of a smile returning. "You are not what I expected." "Well, I aim to disappoint at first, then gradually become tolerable." They walked in silence for a while, broken only by the distant hum of something pulsing beneath the ground, a rhythm deep and old. Elias couldn't shake the feeling that the planet itself was watching him. He sighed. "So just to recap, I crash-landed on an uncharted world, met an alien queen who says I was expected, and I may or may not be hallucinating sentient sandwiches." "Yes," Cherelle said, "and that is only the beginning." And somehow, Elias knew she was right. The palace wasn't what Elias expected. When someone says palace, your brain conjures up golden domes, endless marble, and statues of self-important rulers pointing at things. What Elias got instead was a vast organic structure grown into the side of a lavender mountain, its walls pulsing gently like the inside of some colossal seashell. Vines glowed faintly along the surfaces, whispering in a language his translator refused to interpret, claiming it had ethical objections. Inside, light didn't come from fixtures but from floating orbs that drifted like lazy jellyfish, humming in harmony with one another. The air was thick with a perfume of ozone and alien flora, and there was a faint, persistent hum in the back of his skull, as if the building itself were trying to hum a tune only it remembered. "I don't mean to criticize alien interior design," Elias said as they passed a hall where the walls morphed fluidly around them, "but your architecture feels like it wants to hug me, and I'm not emotionally ready for that." Cherelle walked beside him with the serene grace of someone who had never tripped on her own feet or eaten instant noodles for dinner 3 nights in a row. The Hall of Memory responds to thought and emotion. It adjusts itself based on your mental state. That explains the faint smell of panic and denial. She chuckled. It was a sound that made something warm and vaguely uncomfortable stir in Elias' chest. He'd never been the romantic type. Space travel had a way of making long-term commitment difficult when your potential date might live 3 parsecs away, but there was something about Cherelle that drew him in. It wasn't just her alien beauty or the otherworldly confidence. It was the way she looked at him, like she already knew him, like she'd been waiting. Which apparently she had. They arrived at a circular chamber with a domed ceiling that displayed a simulation of the night sky, though Elias swore some of those constellations were blinking at him. Pillows floated above the floor in neat hovering rings, and a low table in the center held an arrangement of food items that ranged from reasonably edible to aggressively wriggly. "You must be hungry," Cherelle said, gesturing to the table. "The purplian root replenishes neural synapses, the spire fruits enhance temporal cognition, and the florin," she hesitated, eyeing the jiggling mass, "well, it tastes better if you don't ask questions." Elias eyed the florin. It seemed to be pulsating in anticipation. "I once ate something on Calrian 9 that tried to sue me for damages. This gives me the same vibe." He settled for a spire fruit which tasted oddly like cinnamon and static electricity, and tried not to think about what temporal cognition might entail. As he chewed, Cherelle watched him with the kind of intensity that usually preceded marriage proposals or medical experimentation. "You are wondering why you were brought here." "Wondering, yes, mildly terrified, also yes." She nodded slowly. "You are the one from the prophecy, the stellar bond." Elias nearly choked on a fruit seed that briefly blinked at him before disintegrating. "I'm the what now?" "The stellar bond, chosen by the echo threads of the cosmos. Your arrival was foreseen. Your presence is the key to the survival of our world." He stared at her, trying to determine if this was a prank, a psychotic break, or just an incredibly elaborate marketing campaign. "Look, I'm flattered, really, but the last time someone told me I was the one, I ended up knee-deep in sentient sand and allergic to my own armor. I don't usually get prophecy gigs. I'm more of a side character who lives through the sequel kind of guy." Cherelle's eyes held a gravity that silenced his sarcasm. "I have seen you, not just in vision but in the streams, the flow of time that moves backward and forward, intersecting all possibilities. Your arrival is not an accident." Elias leaned back on one of the floaty cushions, which attempted to massage his back with a little too much enthusiasm. So let me get this straight, you've got a world-threatening crisis, a prophecy that says some random human spaceman is going to fix it, and somehow I got the winning lottery ticket. You are not random, you were selected. By what? A cosmic claw machine. She rose then, and the room responded to her movement, the lights dimming, the air vibrating with quiet resonance. In the center of the room, a sphere rose from the table's surface, flickering with fragments of memory, vision, and star maps. Elias saw himself older, maybe wiser, or maybe just with less helmet hair, standing at the heart of a massive energy nexus. The planet around him was fracturing, light streaming into the sky like a cracked crystal, and beside him stood Cherelle, her hand in his. That's not creepy at all, he said, squinting. How old is this prophecy? It dates back over 3,000 of your years. The Zephyrian oracle saw you in the convergence, the moment when time, phrase, and choice becomes destiny. Well, that's comforting. Nothing says relax like millennia of expectation riding on your shoulders. Cherelle turned back to him, and something softened in her expression. I know this is much to accept, but you are not alone. You were never alone. He looked at her for a long moment, then down at his half-eaten spire fruit, which was slowly reassembling itself. Okay, so say I buy into this whole destined savior idea. What exactly do I need to save you from? The orb responded before she could speak, its colors turning dark, its images jagged and broken. A swirling mass of void energy twisted across its surface, devouring light. Structures collapsed. Zephyrians screamed. Something was coming, something vast, ancient, and hungry. Elias felt a chill crawl down his spine. Oh good, he said. I was worried this was going to be a quiet weekend. They called it the Hollow Star. Elias stood at the edge of the balcony that jutted from Cherelle's palace like a shard of crystal, daring the sky to blink. Below him, the city of Evie sprawled in curves and spirals, structures grown from living stone winding like a symphony composed in architecture. Walkways shimmered as if woven from light. Trees bore leaves that rang with sound when the wind stirred them, and far off, past the glowing fields and floating monoliths, hung a second moon, cracked in half like an abandoned promise. He sipped something Cherelle had called glunari nectar, which by taste alone was about 40% sugar and 60% optimism. So, he said, swirling the glass, this hollow star sounds cheerful. Cherelle joined him, her long ears twitching slightly in the breeze. It is not a star. It is a void parasite, a sentient singularity born from collapsed reality. It consumes worlds, unmakes them. Oh, so like my Uncle Greg at family dinners. She arched an elegant eyebrow. He has this thing where he tells everyone their careers are meaningless and then steals the last role, truly cosmic in his own way. Cherelle's smile was faint but present. The hollow star arrived centuries ago. We repelled it once at great cost, but it left part of itself behind, its eye, a seed of entropy. For generations it has grown in the heart of Zephyr, slow and unseen, until now. Let me guess, Elias said, setting down the glass. It's waking up and it's cranky. Her gaze turned distant. Already the ground fractures, energy fields destabilize, the streams tremble, time bends at the edges. Which would explain why I saw a squirrel wearing a monocle in the garden this morning. That was Counselor No. He paused. Please tell me you're kidding. I am not. Elias stared at the city again, his brain quietly rewriting the memory of the squirrel to include council robes and a tiny briefcase. Okay, so I'm the stellar bond. The prophecy says I can stop the hollow star. Do we know how, or are we in the vague destiny and dramatic music phase of the plan? Cherelle's eyes glimmered. There is a device, older than our civilization, the core harmonizer, hidden in the ruins of Viralan, our ancient capital. It interfaces with the streams, the temporal lattice that binds this world. Only one attuned to the prophecy can awaken it. And let me guess, I'm attuned. You are the only one who can be. Well, I do have a way of breaking very expensive things. Maybe I just hit it really hard. Cherelle gave him a patient look. You joke, but it will not be simple. The path to Viralan is corrupted. The eye's influence distorts the land. We must travel carefully. Elias nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. Right, dangerous journey through a time-warping wasteland possibly filled with angry entropy monsters. No big deal. You will not go alone. He glanced sideways. You're coming. I am, and so are others. As if on cue, a portal shimmered into being behind them, unfolding like a curtain of water. From it stepped 3 Zephyrians in gleaming armor etched with pulsating blue script. One had a mechanical arm that whirred with arcane tech, another held a staff that bent gravity in a small sphere at its tip. The third wore no armor at all but had a pet creature perched on his shoulder, a small, smug thing with 8 eyes and a smirk. "Meet your escort," Chirel said, "Captain Valen, Temporal Engineer Saw, and Tracker Nor." Elias squinted. "Which one's the squirrel?" "No, of course." They all gave him slight bows except for Nor's pet, which winked and tried to bite his boot. Elias pulled back with an undignified yelp. "Friendly little guy." "Her name is Biscuit," Nor said solemnly. "She has excellent taste in enemies." "Well, I feel honored." Valen stepped forward. "Queen Chirel speaks highly of you, human. If she says you are the stellar bond, then you will have my sword and my plasma axe and my left boot if things get truly desperate." "That's oddly specific," Elias said. Sa stepped up next, her voice cool and sharp. "I've already recalibrated the shuttle to account for chronospatial distortion. Your mere presence seems to stabilize short-term fracturing. Either you are incredibly lucky or you have quantum charisma." Elias gave a mock bow. "I prefer entropic charm." Preparations moved quickly after that. A vessel was readied, sleek and humming with anti-gravity tech. It looked less like a ship and more like a silvered arrow carved from moonlight. They called it the Whisper. Elias just hoped it didn't live up to its name in terms of shielding. As they boarded, he looked back at the palace once more. The wind stirred the long banners hanging from its peaks. Somewhere deep below, the hollow star turned in its slumber. He climbed aboard and strapped in next to Chirel. "Any final tips before we set off on this epic, probably death-laced quest?" She leaned close, her eyes filled with galaxies. "Yes, do not feed Biscuit after midnight." The ship hummed, the air shivered, and they lifted into the sky toward ancient ruins, cosmic nightmares, and a prophecy that felt more like a practical joke by the universe. Elias tightened his straps and muttered, "Well, at least it's not Tuesday." The wastelands of Zephyra weren't what Elias expected. He pictured cracked deserts, black lightning, maybe a few skeletal trees weeping quantum tears, dramatic apocalypse vibes. Instead, what sprawled out before the ship as the Whisper descended was a surreal mosaic of broken landscapes. Forests hung upside down from levitating cliffs, rivers ran backward into the sky. At one point, he spotted a herd of 6-legged deer galloping across a vertical waterfall and decided not to question anything for the rest of the day. "This place looks like someone let a time traveler rearrange furniture while blindfolded," he muttered as they disembarked. Captain Valen adjusted the plasma axe on his back. "The eye's influence, the land has not obeyed natural laws for decades." Elias stepped gingerly onto the moss that shifted colors underfoot from lime green to a vaguely accusatory mauve. "Good to know, I'll try not to sneeze and accidentally erase the 17th century." The ruins of Viraland lay just ahead, partially submerged in a lake that refused to reflect anything but the sky from last Thursday. Jagged towers jutted from the water, wrapped in bioluminescent vines that pulsed to a rhythm only they could hear. Ancient symbols flickered across stones, shifting between languages none of which Elias recognized, except one that briefly turned into a rude gesture and winked at him. "That one's for tourists," Sa said without looking up from her scanning device. The group advanced cautiously. Nor, the tracker, moved ahead with Biscuit riding on his shoulder, her 8 eyes scanning every direction like a paranoid spider. Elias brought up the rear mostly because he didn't trust his boots not to spontaneously evolve new features. "You'd think the prophecy would have included a user manual," he muttered. Chirel walked beside him, her long ears twitching as she observed their surroundings. Prophecies rarely care about convenience. They're written in riddles and symbols to prevent premature interference. "Great, so we're fighting a time-bending nightmare entity with the equivalent of an IKEA instruction sheet." Valen held up a fist, signaling them to halt. Ahead, the stone walkway split into a network of floating platforms orbiting a cracked tower that pulsed with sickly red light. A storm twisted in the sky above it, dark clouds turning inside out and raining something that suspiciously resembled glitter. Elias squinted. "Is the weather supposed to look like a disco ball having an existential crisis?" Sa's device beeped erratically. chronofield distortion intensifying. We're in proximity of the eye's aura, time is thinning. As if on cue, the world stuttered. It was subtle at first, a pause between heartbeats, a flicker in the corner of the eye. Then the platform beneath them blinked out of existence for precisely 1 second, and Elias found himself briefly floating midair before gravity remembered it had responsibilities. He landed with a grunt and rolled to his feet. Okay, that was new. Stay close, Churrell said. The harmonizer lies within the core tower, but we must pass the Sentience Gate. Elias frowned. That sounds suspiciously like a metaphor. It isn't. They reached the central platform, which bobbed gently underfoot like a nervous sea creature. The tower loomed above them, cracked open along its spine, radiating energy that tasted like ozone and regret. And then the gate awoke. It emerged from the stone like an unfolding puzzle, layers of light and metal spinning into a face, or something like a face comprised of gears, constellations, and disapproving cheekbones. Its voice echoed across dimensions. Who seeks the harmonizer? Elias stepped forward. Hi, Elias, bit lost, possibly hallucinating. How are you? The gate blinked, literally, its central eyes spinning like a coin. Only the stellar bond may pass, submit to temporal authentication. A beam of light shot down, engulfing Elias. His body froze, but his mind snapped into overdrive. Suddenly he was everywhere. He saw himself as a child building a model spaceship, as a young cadet failing zero-gravity training by sneezing himself into a wall, as a man drifting alone in the void clutching a picture of Earth. Then forward visions of battles, of holding Churrell's hand in a field of stars, of the hollow star fracturing before him like a shattered mirror. He returned with a gasp. Identity confirmed. The gate vanished just like that, not even a goodbye or thanks for the trauma. The tower opened, revealing a spiral staircase of floating steps leading downward, where the light pulsed with a softer rhythm like a heartbeat. Elias turned to the group, slightly dazed. Well, that was either an ancient security protocol or a very enthusiastic psychic performance review. They descended together, each step resonating with a tone only Elias could hear, a melody just beyond memory. At the base of the tower lay the harmonizer, a spherical structure of impossible geometry spinning in a dozen directions at once. Symbols bloomed across its surface, and as Elias approached, it stopped spinning. It waited. Churrell stepped beside him. This is where your choice matters. The harmonizer responds to the soul. You must offer it a piece of yourself, a memory, a truth. Elias stared at the device, then slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a frayed photo, his old crew, taken before the mission that went wrong. He pressed it to the harmonizer's surface. My truth, he whispered. I'm afraid, but I want to do the right thing anyway. The harmonizer lit up brighter than any star he'd seen, and deep beneath the earth, the hollow star stirred. They emerged from the depths of the tower as dawn broke over a sky that had never known consistency. The storm above Virland had stilled, the fractured clouds had fused into smooth, pearlescent streams of vapor winding through the upper atmosphere like ribbons. Even the gravity, which had previously behaved like a cat with authority issues, now seemed to hum in quiet submission. Elias stood at the edge of the stone causeway, the harmonizer's pulse still resonating faintly beneath his fingertips. It had accepted his offering, his truth, and in turn it had woven itself through the streams of Zephyra, realigning the frayed lattice of time and space that the eye had been poisoning. He hadn't destroyed the eye, he changed the frequency of the world itself, made the disease incompatible with the host. He adjusted the straps on his jacket and looked at Churrell. So we just outvibed a galactic nightmare. Precisely, she replied, a rare smirk tugging at her lips. We harmonized entropy. Great band name, Elias muttered, dibs on keyboard. The others had gathered around the harmonizer, watching as the last wisps of the eye's influence faded. Captain Valen stood like a statue, his armor dimming from battle mode to ceremonial rest. Sa was already analyzing residual chronofields, tapping her device with the grim joy of someone who lived for post-disaster diagnostics. Nor was feeding Biscuit what appeared to be a small cake made of glowing moss. Biscuit, to no one's surprise, looked deeply offended. So that's it? Elias asked, half expecting a trapdoor to open or a surprise boss fight to pop out from under a suspicious rock. Churrell tilted her head toward the east where the sun had risen as a perfect disk of golden calm. The eye's tether is severed, the streams are healing, Viraland may become livable again in time. You did what none of us could. Right, because I'm the stellar Bond, he said, making finger quotes. Still trying to wrap my head around that title. Sounds like a sci-fi romance novel I'd find in my mom's attic. Cheryl's smile deepened. You laugh, but the title was always metaphorical. The prophecy never meant a chosen warrior, it meant a link, a bridge, someone who carried not only the ability to effect change but the willingness to understand. Elias looked away, the truth of it settling slowly in his chest. For all the cosmic stakes, the end hadn't come through fire or violence. It came from empathy, from choosing to face fear instead of run from it. Somewhere along the way, the broken astronaut who had drifted alone between stars had become something else. Guess I'm not just some guy who crashed his ship in the wrong quadrant. No, she said softly, you're the man who saved my world and possibly made Biscuit a local deity, though we're still discussing temple logistics. Elias snorted, tell me it has tiny pews. The journey back to Evie's took far less time thanks to the stabilized streams. The whisper glided through the atmosphere like it belonged there now, no longer resisting the world's flow. As they approached the city, it was clear change had already begun. The floating monoliths hummed with renewed energy. The song leaves of the glimmering trees rang with deeper, fuller tones. Zephyr was alive in a way it hadn't been for centuries. They were met with celebration lights, aerial displays, food that sparkled in defiance of chemistry. Even the sky had shifted shades, as if the planet itself had decided to try on hope for the first time in generations. Elias had expected a throne room speech or a medal, maybe a poem written by a council of wise elders. What he got was a quiet rooftop with Cherel, 2 steaming mugs of Glunari nectar, and a gentle wind that smelled like rain on memory. So, she said, curling her legs beneath her, what will you do now, Stellar Bond? He sipped the overly enthusiastic beverage and considered. For once, I don't feel like I'm rushing to the next crisis. Might be nice to stay, help rebuild, learn how to read floating time stones without accidentally starting a dance party. That was one time. It was an epic time. They fell into comfortable silence. The city pulsed below, alive and whole. Somewhere in the distance, Biscuit barked imperiously at a noble who had apparently not bowed fast enough. Elias leaned back and looked at the stars. They were different here, softer somehow, not as cold. He thought of his old crew, of the solitude he'd carried with him through the void, and of the woman beside him, now queen, alien, friend, maybe more. Back home, he said quietly, I was always running, from expectations, from loss. Out here, I found everything I didn't know I needed. Cherel watched him with those bright, ageless eyes. You were never lost, Elias, just waiting to arrive. He chuckled, prophets in their poetic loopholes. No loophole, she said, and touched his hand gently, just truth. In the days that followed, Elias became something between ambassador and anomaly. He helped Saw design communication relays that could bridge time gaps. He sparred with Valen and only occasionally lost teeth. He even gave a guest lecture at the Zephyrian Institute of Chronothics titled What Not to Do with a Black Hole and a Sandwich. The planet healed, the people thrived, and Elias stayed not because a prophecy told him to or because the stars demanded it, but because something deep inside had shifted. He had found meaning not in the mission but in the mess, in the laughter, in the moments between catastrophes where people simply were. A fallen commander, a queen with ears like starlight, a rodent demigod named Biscuit. It wasn't what he'd planned. It was better. The end.